Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, and we're joined here tonight in the studio by Dr. محمد الحليم, the political analyst. Dr. الحليم, thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Doctor, now, before we start talking about Egypt's role in the Middle East, the visit of President Abdel Fattah al-Sisi to the University of Kafr al-Sheikh, which is something that carries a lot of weight and a significance to the development work that took place in Kafr al-Sheikh University, a university that houses or is a place for 75,000 students, where they've talked about the sports facilities, the hospital there, talking about the specialization in artificial intelligence. There are so many great aspects about the development in Kafr al-Sheikh University, and it was highlighted by the President's visit there. How important and how significant is it for this visit to the university and really highlighting the importance being paid and the attention being paid for the educational sector?
Yeah, I mean, it occupies pride of place among the other visits. And so far as actually, I mean, His Own Excellency, Mr. Fattah al-Sisi, is aiming every now and again actually at highly elevating the cultural ties as much as the civilized aspects, as much as the modern means of technology and the modern technological aspects actually of developing all the media actually of higher education, particularly, I mean, participating in the activities and the sports and the high intelligence and many other fields actually that would highlight in somehow or another and cope with, you know, I mean, the major trends of the international educational systems actually. Kafr al-Sheikh, as it stands, is one of the many distinguished ones actually within Egypt, with a great deal of technological details, higher educational systems, elegant and very much distinguished supervisors and professors in almost all the fields actually. I think that the aim of Mr. Fattah al-Sisi actually is trying to cope with the modern technological needs on wide universities, and in the meantime actually to cope with the major trend in Europe as much as in the United States of America, particularly the process of digitalizing actually almost all the respects, and in the meantime digitalization that should be part and parcel of our own daily routine, and the artificial intelligence that, as he did confess today in today's word, that it should entail and cover not only actually all the Egyptian ways and sites and dimensions of life, but actually of almost the whole life. So, I mean, his own visit at this particular stage, I mean, would represent and underline his own prime preoccupation with a great deal of deep interest actually towards achieving higher motives and educational systems, as much as very much widely advanced cultural details, as much as coping with the major trends in the international arena actually from the point of view of education.
Yes. Well, we've seen, I mean, the establishment is up to the highest international standards, and we've seen the President with Minister of Higher Education, Abdel Ghaffar, really highlighting the importance, as you've mentioned, the artificial intelligence, saying that it's the future of Egypt and the future of the whole world. And as you've mentioned, Egypt is entering this, has already entered this age of digitization and digitalization, and really prepping the students to training and refining their skills for the real world, the job market, the future of Egypt. Do you think that this constitutes some sort of a giant leap in the educational and in the educational sector and the employment sector, as well as not as the traditional educational facilities and strategies we've been following for decades?
Well, in our own interests, as much as in the interests of almost all the students, not only of Kafr al-Sheikh University actually, but I think of almost all universities within Egypt, that this visit side by side with the visit of Minister Dr. Khalid Abdel Ghaffar, actually, Minister of Education, actually is very much representing very wide dimensions, as much as very much strategic roles that are to be necessitated in the part of the postgraduate students. But before actually getting into the process of being highly graduated from all these universities, that you should have to be, and they would have to be actually equipped with all the experiences actually that might be there necessitated on the job market, and in the meantime actually preparing them actually for what you might call coping with the international arena as much as the social high standardized aspects of modern means of technology as much as the higher educational system, so to speak. So, I mean, this is one of his own prime concerns and one of his own deep interests that he would like actually to push the students, particularly those postgraduate ones, into a new phase, a new era actually, that is highly equipped and prepared with a great deal of knowledge, experiences, specialization in the field, particularly the artificial intelligence, as I just said, that would be necessitated in the high international market. Insofar as that almost in every conceivable respect in all dimensions within the whole globe, this NOC and this particular interest is highly needed actually, particularly when we are entering, we seem to be quite entering the sort of a phase that would control and supervise almost all the actions and reactions of not only Middle East countries, but actually perhaps the whole world, re-editing and reshaping the social arena, the scientific trend, as much as preparing our own future generation, that is the recently postgraduate ones, to cope with highly modern technological details on an international arena.
Yes.
Also.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, as Dr. Al-Halim has mentioned, it's not just a development for the educational sector that Egyptians have been calling for many years. It is now even taking Egypt in a high-ranking position within the educational sectors worldwide. Now, Dr. Al-Halim, our topic for tonight, which is really focusing on Egypt's role within finding peace within the Arab region and the Middle East. Now, I want to start with focusing on the Palestinian-Israeli conflict. We've seen a lot of developments taking place over the past few years, and we've seen Israel really strengthening ties with many Arab countries. Now, Egypt has been quite active in this file for decades, but now it's taking even bigger steps and bolder steps, trying to really find this a peaceful agreement between both sides with a two-state solution. How far do you feel Egypt has gone to really achieve that sort of understanding and communication and a peaceful agreement between both sides?
Right. For a long period of time, Egypt has always been there, participating and endorsing as much as helping the Palestinian cause in almost all the respects, financially, medically, culturally, as much as strategically, I would say. Since 1948, I mean, pardon, Egypt has always been there. And despite the false allegations and the far from being true rumors that with the rechanging of the map of the road, that is the coming of a newly elected Israeli prime minister, that the whole thing will be stopped and will come to a stoppage actually in the consulatic as much as in the diplomatic relations, and in bringing the tussling groups, that is Fatah and Hamas, at one go and bringing them together at one decision taking. But to the amazement actually of the whole world and to the astonishment of almost all those who would not proclaim the great deal of success of the Egyptian presidential authority, His Own Excellency Mr. President Fattah Sisi actually was achieving a masterstroke right from the early start. After the demolition and the vast devastation and the bombardment of the Israeli troops of Gaza Strip, there was an inauguration, the first perhaps and the foremost Arab country that would give it a go actually was Egypt, actually, that possessing the tools and the ways and the means, offering solutions, as much as attempting at the very beginning of reshaping and retrying, actually, to reconciliate the tussling groups and then interfere to just propose, reconstruct the Gaza Strip, offering millions and millions, actually, on its own consent and by the consensus of opinion of almost all the Egyptians, pardon, as one sign of solidarity of the Egyptian people actually towards the Palestinian cause. This is at one respect, but the whole situation was not as an easy one as it was to be conceived in the first instance. For about 4 months actually would have to be lapsed clearing and cleaning actually the demolished houses and the devastated territorial lands. And then side by side with the United Arab Emirates actually, with the Egyptian aid, with our own expertise as much as technological aspects actually. We would interfere if now and again actually just by way of preparing the whole thing to be reconstructed again. And also we have had some tussling groups at the very beginning and some obstacles and predicaments actually, that is the refusal of you know, as an Israeli side to edit and to re-exchange actually the hostages and the captivated figures actually on both sides, that is on the part of the Israeli side at one hand and Hamas on the other, but because of the diplomatic reconciliations and very much a strategic way of pacifying the roots and the predicaments actually on both sides, we have managed at the end of the day actually of convincing Yahya Sinwar actually to accept the whole solution and to try to participate in accepting the endorsement of the Egyptian presidential authority actually by receiving the great and the vast amount of sum of money actually, because this also was one of the doubtful facts on the part of the Palestinian side, that Hamas would endorse and would insist on getting as much as amount of money for the process of reconstructing the Gaza Strip. But because of the interference and the monetary system and because of the reconciliations and diplomatic ties and the strategic interference on the part of our own authority actually, we have managed actually to convince Hamas. And I think that the great deal of welcoming gestures on the part of the Palestinian people was very much a clear testimony to the fact that we have achieved one of the master strokes, one of the greatest steps towards not only pacifying the physical demolished and deteriorated lands, but of recaptivating and rehabilitating actually the infrastructure of the psychological entities actually of the Palestinian people.
Well, Dr. Al-Halim, now you've mentioned the reconstruction work that Egypt is involved in the Gaza Strip, $500 million. And also, I mean, the president has met the Israeli Foreign Minister Lapid, and last September he met with the Israeli Prime Minister Bennett in Cairo. And we're also seeing the visits by Egypt's Chief of Intelligence, Abbas Kamel, to the Gaza Strip. And we're seeing the strengthening and the change in the relationship between Israel and many Arab countries. Do you feel now with this change and the new Prime Minister, the new Israeli Prime Minister, do you feel that there's now a different sort of direction that Israel might be taking, or more of an inclination or an ease in negotiations to reach a two-state solution, or is it still there are many obstacles to overcome?
Rightly so. I mean, during the previous period of the presidential reign of Donald Trump, there was a great deal of obstinacy, as you might have said right now, rightly actually. I mean, deterring facts as much as impediments in the way of the two-state solution. The establishment of Jerusalem as the eternal Israeli capital actually, and the removal of the American embassy actually to Jerusalem were two odious distinction facts that would impede almost any negotiation and any negotiating aspects between the Arab world as much as the Israeli side, or so to speak, the Palestinian and the Israeli side. But with the coming of the new Prime Minister, that's Naftali Bennett, actually, I think that the whole issue was to be revitalized again. And the notion of the two-state solution was to be expressed for a second time and renovated, and negotiations and peace initiations, actually. And the very much successful remunerated sort of jobs and journeys on the Chief of Intelligence, Mr. Abbas Kamel, actually, I mean, to Jerusalem was very much successful in paving the way and of, you know, I mean, of settling the tussles and the struggles between Fatah and Hamas, because, I mean, one of the major impediments that we may be facing actually in there, not just the process of reconstructing the physical land, but actually, I mean, to reconcile them and to come to one consensus of opinion that is not the presidential chair that should be fought on and upon and should be struggled about actually at the present time situation, but the welfare and the sincerity as much as the tranquility and the peace of mind of almost all the Palestinian people. This is one of the highest tasks that the presidential authority would necessitate and would try to practice right from the early start. And I think that we are entering and getting into a sort of a new successful phase, inaugurated by the peaceful talks, actually, by the peaceful settlements and the negotiations on the part of our own presidential authority, and accepting every now and again the process of sitting side by side together with Fatah and Hamas,
yes.
and in the meantime of convincing Bennett, one of the most stubborn and ardent believers of the Jerusalem as an eternal capital of Israel, as a point of discussion, a point of negotiation, a sort of a subject matter that should be actually not tussled about, but negotiated around,
yes.
outside.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, definitely this is one step or one aspect of the Egyptian efforts for the Middle East region, but also Egypt has been going through going many lengths and exerting a lot of effort for different countries, different Arab states and different crises taking place around the world. Let's check out this report and we'll be right back.
During the past few years, Egypt succeeded in restoring its vital and pioneering role in the region and the world, as Egyptian diplomacy has become an important and effective element that cannot be ignored when addressing regional and global crises. Egypt is a regional power and has a vital role in Libya, Sudan, Syria, Yemen and Palestine. The Egyptian role is indispensable, and the way to resolve any political crisis in the Middle East, no matter how great it is, has become necessary to pass through Cairo. This is evidenced by the recent meetings with U.S. Secretary of State, as well as the foreign ministers of Cyprus, Greece and France. A phone call that took place between President Sisi and Russian President Putin recently confirmed the effectiveness of Egypt's regional role, as through this contact, the developments of the most important regional and international files in the region were discussed. Putin also expressed his appreciation for President Sisi's personal efforts in this regard, which strengthened political tracks for settling crises in the region and consolidating Egypt's role as a center for maintaining peace and security in its regional surroundings, stressing Russia's keenness to continue intensive cooperation and coordination between the two countries. In the same context, President Abdel Fattah el-Sisi held several important meetings during the important participation in the French capital, Paris, in the Paris International Conference on Libya, upon the invitation of French President Emmanuel Macron. The two leaders discussed all aspects of bilateral ties, which have witnessed a qualitative leap in recent years. The president also held a series of meetings with senior officials of the French government to discuss ways to advance cooperation in economic and investment as well as military fields. Moreover, he met with many heads of state and governments to discuss advancing cooperation frameworks and consult on various regional and international issues. Cairo also witnessed the visit of Britain's Crown Prince Charles, and whoever wanted to know the truth and strength of the Egyptian role should follow up on the positive developments in these files after each visit to Cairo.
Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, continuing our discussion with Dr. Abdel-Halim. Sir, now, there are so many different issues and files within the Middle East region and North Africa. Let's start off with Libya. Now, Libya is slated for presidential and parliamentary elections this month, on the 24th. That's in 10 days' time. Egypt has done a lot of mediation efforts, bringing together the Libyan factions, calling for the militias, the mercenaries, the foreign forces to withdraw from Libya. We're talking about 10 days. We're 10 days away from elections. Is there any doubt that these elections might not be taking place, or are we on a smooth sailing path towards the elections?
Well, I wouldn't say it's you know, a very smooth process as it may seem to be actually, but replete with instances of obstacles and very much harsh impediments. Because, I mean, you know, it's a very complicated file. The Libyan file is very much a turbulent one, indeed, full of, you know, I mean, the thing and its own opposite. A large number of contradictions, a large number of deviations and factions and foreign countries, mercenaries, armed militias, actually, each of which would proclaim its own right portion of the Libyan gas as much as the Libyan oil, the fortune of the Libyan people, I would really say. So, I mean, it seems to be a very much complicated one, despite that it had been, you know, inaugurated before, since about 3 years. We have had, you know, Al-Sukhairat to begin with, we have had Palermo, we have had Berlin 1 and 2, we had Geneva, Kuwait summit, the agreement in Cairo, or the Cairo agreement. We have had all these initiations and all these agreements, actually. You know, towards the ceasefire and towards silencing guns, had it not been for the fact that the interference on the part of, you know, our, you know, I mean, inaugurative steps on a presidential scale, the guns would have been continuing, actually, its own firing. But because of that sort of success and distinctive way of getting into the heart of the matter, actually, that the silencing gun is at hand. And in the meantime, that 3 dimensions that had been accepted and enacted at the end of the day, that is the economic dimension, the peaceful diplomatic one, and the military, which is 5 and +5. All these 3 targeting entities that would come out of Geneva, as much as Berlin 1 and 2, would have to be, I mean, applied to a greater extent on realistic grounding outside. Had it not been for the fact that there are some mercenaries and some armed forces, actually, particularly Khalid al-Mishri is one of those, you know, I mean, cultural advisory body that assumes one of the highest distinctive diplomatic places in Libya, which is the chancellor for the high Libyan case that should be accorded and that should be distinguished, I mean, and should be accepted on the part of al-Minifi, actually, as a supreme consultant leader of the Libyan case. All the legislations and all the orders and all the amendments and the amendments and commandments on the part of Mohammed al-Minifi actually should never ever actually be realistically adapted on grounding, had it not been for the fact that, you know, I mean, Khalid al-Mishri, who is being endorsed and fortified by Turkish side as much as you know, some Muslim Brotherhood, despite the fact that he himself in one of the TV shows, actually, in France 24, he declared that he abstained and reacted against the Muslim Brotherhood. But most of the Libyans actually would really endorse and insist on the fact that he is still even spiritually belonging to them and actually endorsing their own ethical values and their own teachings actually within the Libyan territorial lands. This is at one side. And at another, actually, there is France side by side with Egypt, as much as the United Arab Emirates attempt actually to pacify the whole thing, aided by the countries of the coastal line, of the deserted coastal line, I would say.
Dr. Al-Halim, what about the Syrian file? Now, the Syrian issue involved a lot of international players, and we've seen Egypt really has great relations with many of the countries that were involved, including France, as we've seen. Now, where do we stand in our efforts regarding the Syrian issue? Are we going to have, or at least reach a sustainable, safe, stable Syria anytime soon with the involvement of all the international players?
Well, I mean, during the course of the last 2 years, we have had very much successful steps towards, I mean, pacifying a large number of tussling files, actually, in Syria. But still, actually, the struggle is always there. I mean, America is always there on top of the scale. There is the Russian side as well. And the Turkish interference, I mean, just by way of preventing the establishment of the Kurdish state. So the 3 tussling groups here, I mean, would consummate at the end of the day, actually, a hand of superiority and a sense of sublimity on large portions of the Syrian territorial lands, particularly, the Golan Heights, that seems to be quite very much pivotal, not only for the safety and security of the Syrian territorial lands, but actually for Israel. The fact that Israel, is seizing and putting its own hand actually on the Golan Heights since quite about 40 years ago, without the least bullet to be triggered, actually, without the least negotiating aspect on the part of the Syrian people. That's why our own role in there was very much arduous one indeed, despite the fact that we achieved a great deal of success, not only, during these days, but during the days of Hafez al-Assad, actually. Egypt has always been there endorsing, reclaiming, as much as helping almost all the attempts on the part of the Syrian people, actually.
Sir, now one final question, because we're running out of time now. The Egyptian efforts are not just political efforts or diplomatic efforts. It's also, there's another aspect, which is the humanitarian help. We've seen yesterday Egypt talking and discussing with the Lebanese Prime Minister Najib Mikati, exporting gas to Lebanon to generate electricity. How important is it also that Egypt is lending a humanitarian helping hand to a brotherly country such as Lebanon?
Yeah, we had offered since quite a long period of time, about 6 or 7 months ago, actually, since the demolition of Beirut port and the bombardment with nitrates of bombardment there. We had always been helping them, and in the meantime providing them with not only gas, I would say, actually electric methods, as much as
and medical aid.
Medical aids, actually, towards the pandemic of COVID-19. And in the meantime, transfusion and providing them with gas lines also is one of the humanitarian aids. Particularly, Hassan Nasrallah is very much, creating a large number of impediments of reaching to the social solution, actually.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, the Egyptian efforts would need to take much more than one episode on the show. But unfortunately, that's all the time we have for this edition of the Daily Debate. Before we go, I'd like to thank my very distinguished guest, Dr. محمد الحليم, the political analyst. Dr. الحليم, always a pleasure having you with us on the show. Thank you very much, sir. Ladies and gentlemen, please stay tuned for more coming up on Nile International. I'm Henny Saif. Thank you for joining us.